Hello and welcome back to Sport Unlocked, the 53rd most popular sports pod in Italy on Apple at times this week. We're still only in English for now, but please keep on subscribing, rating and reviewing us on your pod apps. It's really appreciated. It's great to have thousands of you engaging in sports news. And this week, we're going to be delving into off-field developments in football, cricket, NFL, rugby, and Olympic matters. You'll hear from some key sports figures, but of course, alongside me, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, as ever, is Tariq Panja from the New York Times and Martyn Ziegler from the Times.
Hi, Rob. Yeah, lots of interesting developments. Good to see you too, Tariq. I think you've been to the Euro 2022 women's draw, Rob, which was held in Manchester.
Yeah, it took place very close to Old Trafford. Of course, we should have had it a year ago. Event delayed by the pandemic, like so many. Various coaches all mingling. Not much of this virtual stuff. It was back to real life again for UEFA. I think they're particularly keen to show that. And topic of conversation actually was around the recent World Cup qualifiers and the lack of competitive balance in some of them. I was talking to Nadine Kessler, the UEFA chief of women's football, in particular about England, who in their last 4 qualifiers all won, scored 32 goals and conceded none. And 4-0 victory over Northern Ireland last weekend at Wembley, which in the past, England playing a women's game at Wembley might have created a bit more buzz. There was only, 20-odd thousand there in the end. And in part, that will be due to the fact that these qualifiers just aren't very competitive at all. And we do see some of that in the men's game as well. But I think it's more pronounced in the women's game, where you've got those few countries, particularly at the top of Europe, with more professional players and greater investment in the women's game, which creates this disparity. And Nadine Kessler was saying to me, actually, they are going to try to look at the format once again. This time in Europe, they had introduced open qualifying, so all 51 teams who enter in Europe into the women's qualifying split into 9 groups, whereas previously they had forms of pre-qualifying rounds, which we have had talks about in the men's side of the game as well in Europe.
Actually, they have that in CONCACAF in the men's side. I think there is a sort of preliminary competition before the so-called Hex takes place in CONCACAF, and that makes for a very, very tight competition towards the end. Those who are opposed to it say, well, it just means that some of those islands in the Caribbean only play 1 or 2 games, and then they don't play international football, meaningful international football, for a number of years. But we talked about some of this stuff last week, about this conversation about the calendar and biennial World Cups and innovation. And to me, again, this is another thing that smacks of someone needing to do some smart thinking. What they've done is templated men's football and overlaid women's football on top of it again. And to me, it doesn't make much sense battering someone 10-0 every week. It's not. I don't know who that serves. Sure, something else could come up. Maybe these seeded groups, a Nations League type thing, and then the qualification for winners of 1 or 2 of the lower pots, perhaps. But yeah, I do think that once the competition proper starts, the Euros, I think that it'll be extremely popular. That's one thing I've noticed with women's football, is these national team competitions are hugely popular now, despite, I guess, these club events that UEFA has invested in, the Premier League, etc. It's getting good broadcast coverage in the UK, for example, on Sky and BT. But the real thing that gets bums on seats or eyeballs on TV are these international games. So if there's some way of having more meaningful women's international football, I think that might serve that side of the game better.
Well, you mentioned there, Tariq, about not just replicating things from the men's game, and that was very much what Nadine was saying about the particular nuances of women's football and finding solutions, particularly for the women's game. And I asked her about whether or not they'll look at introducing a Nations League style competition for the women's game. And this is what Nadine Kessler had to say.
Anything is possible, but it doesn't mean that we need to have the exact same format as we now see in the men's. There are different league formats that can be used. A Nations League is one of them. We really need to assess properly the actual issues we have, and then come up with hopefully a format that will be debated also with all, and then help European women's football to grow further.
Very much targeted at the women's game, not just replicated at the men's
Exactly.
game.
There are nuances that you have to look at, and we saw it now with the Women's Champions League format as well. That's why it's not as easy as saying, hey, that works here, let's do it exactly that way. The debate about this pre-qualifying seeding, it all happened. I think we need to really take a look closely to have more evenly matched matches, but also perhaps some opportunities to still see where's the bar and to compete against the very best. So there's no solution yet that I can share with you, but we want to take a look properly and not just, come up with a quick solution, because that qualifying campaign is too important.
Of course, Nadine Kessler speaks from experience. The former German international was the 2014 World Player of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they're taking what seems to be a sensible approach to this, and that they want to do it quickly, because I don't think it's serving anyone much good if you have England beating Luxembourg 10-0, Latvia 10-0, North Macedonia 8-0. It's not good for England. It's not good for the countries on the receiving end of those hidings, and it's certainly not good for the audience, because, I mean, I would say, anecdotally, why would you bother turning up?
And just looking at some of the other teams as well in qualifying so far for the Women's World Cup, France have scored 29 goals, conceded twice. Denmark, 28 goals and conceded only once. That's across their 4 games. And Spain, in a smaller group in 3 games so far, has scored 23 goals. And their defence has not been breached at all in those wins.
Yeah, guys, I wonder if it's a question of how resources are sort of spent in the development of women's football as well. There doesn't seem to be enough, I guess, talent to be clear, in order to fill deep rosters, 23 players at a senior team across the board, plus under 19s, under 20, and that to me speaks. So we kind of I think really at the start of a journey, and I remember when Turkey, for example, in men's football, England used to be drawn against Turkey a lot in the late 80s and early 90s, and they used to give them an absolute hiding. There used to be some really big scores, and I apologise to Turkish listeners, but that's the one that comes to my mind. And I think we're going to see a bit more of this. We it's women's football has come suddenly from nowhere so far so fast. We forget that in until very recently, in a lot of places, it really wasn't a consideration. There's not been hardly any investment, and the investment that's being made now, I guess it's going to take a few years before we see the fruits of that. I think it's all well and good having like shiny teams and brand names and things like that, but in terms of improving the quality of talent and the pathway and volume of players, I think that's going to take a little bit longer.
I think people might forget, it's within my lifetime, the English Football Association had a ban on women's football. It was only until the early 70s that they actually lifted that, which is remarkable.
I think we saw at the Women's World Cup in France in 2019 just the value of more investment in things like coaching, things like the goalkeeping standard really notably increased, and many putting that down to actually suddenly you can actually spend a lot more time with the players, because as they're increasingly professional across Europe in particular, well, they get more time to train. They're not having to take on second jobs. And if people go back a few episodes, we did talk to the agent Joe Tung about the challenge with some clubs still trying to tell players to take second jobs. Well, the more players who can commit their entire working lives to playing the game and training the game, well, that will hopefully lead to far more competitive games. And even the draw in Manchester, it was so well attended. It was being shown live on BBC One in the UK. And now the push is really to sell tickets and to fill the stadiums, and they haven't decided to use huge stadiums for every game. That could be unrealistic to sell out. Nadine Kessler talking about actually prioritising varied venues across the country, and very much with Old Trafford for the opening game and then Wembley for the final, which with the hope to sort of pack the crowds into those next July, when of course there is no summer men's tournament this June.
Yeah, well, just one of the things, guys, might be a broader topic outside of the FIFA or UEFA orbits. It's a question about culture as well, about football being in schools, in countries across Europe and elsewhere, and it kind of being normal. I think it's happening now that girls are playing football in from junior school to high school in a lot of places, and that creates a culture of the game that didn't exist. I'm maybe a little bit younger than Martyn, but when I was at school, we didn't have a girls' football team. There wasn't any girls playing. So if that you're not talking about the professional league and the professional game at all. First of all, I don't think the thing you need to talk about is make it normal for thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of girls who are at school to play and enjoy the game, and then maybe some can go on to play elite football. That's a very new thing as well.
No, I think you're right. I noticed, Rob, that Alexander Sheffrin, the UEFA president, was at the Euro draw in Manchester. Interestingly, I understand that the sports minister, Nigel Huddleston, took the opportunity to stress the commitment of the British and Republic of Ireland countries to a 2030 World Cup bid, because there's been a bit of noise going around the fact that that actually they're having second thoughts about this. Interestingly, in the budget this week, we had £11 million committed from the British government towards that bid. We had Huddleston, as I say, insisting that it was all systems go for that. So maybe reports of its death are a bit premature.
That's a lot of money, isn't it? 11 million pounds. That seems like after what happened to the England bid in 2009, you thought they'd learned their lessons. Is that all public money?
That is all public money. So actually, the last bid, the 2018 World Cup bid, that cost 23 million in total. Most of that was FA money. There was a little bit provided, about 2.5 million provided by the cities of the potential host venues, but the rest was all FA money. The other is all public money. It's very much a Boris Johnson idea, I think, to try and get in with the man on the street.
A lot of spending on globetrotting and consultants. It was a conversation, a talking point on the fringes of the draw. And I think one of the things in particular being discussed is just how much trust can there be in FIFA, how they want the process to go, who they want to actually win. If we just follow Gianni Infantino's own movements recently, his own conversations, and publicly that is, there's a sense he wants more of a legacy defining host for 2030. We've got 2026 is seen as the safe choice after Qatar in particular, of the US, Mexico and Canada. And, I just wonder, would taking the World Cup in 2030 to Britain be quite boring in a way for FIFA and for Infantino? Not particularly striking, rather than, as we've heard him talking about, wanting hosts from different regions and countries maybe at odds with each other coming together. Although maybe in that sense you'd have a France and England bid the way things are going at the moment. But I think that's one of the things they've really got to calculate at FIFA. FIFA present themselves obviously very much so as a transform from the Blatter era. But beyond that, it's a question of what's going on behind the scenes, any manoeuvrings.
Well, to be fair, Blatter also had those visions, and he did take the World Cup to Africa. The only FIFA president who's ever taken it to Africa, when South Africa got the World Cup in 2010, and he took it to Russia for the first time as well. However, that process, flawed process, worked. Martyn, you say this 11 million pounds has been earmarked, but we also have a situation, I guess, with the UEFA president saying he'd like one European bidder, perhaps known by the end of the year, with Spain and Portugal and maybe, to Rob's point, the maverick Italian Saudi Arabian bid being another one. Do you think UEFA still want this one choice, by the end of the year? And does that mean the £11 million is back in being used hopefully to lower gas bills in the UK or something like that?
Yeah, the £11 million will only come in if they actually push ahead with a bid. I mean, there's a feasibility study going on that the FA and the other countries involved have commissioned. That probably won't we won't know the result of that until even as late as the second half of next year. But yes, but Sheffield wants this one European bid, and I think everybody accepts that there is absolutely no point going to trying to take two European bids to FIFA, because you've immediately sort of cut off half your support potentially, and especially if the fact that Gianni Infantino isn't too keen on a European bid for whatever reason, then that's going to be a problem. If you have one European bid, if Sheffield can mobilise everybody behind it, then they've got a very good chance of winning. So the big issue first for the British and Irish is to get past Spain and Portugal, and vice versa. I think Sheffield is going to. I don't think he wants to have a sort of internal UEFA vote about it. I think he'll try and avoid that if at all possible. I think we've talked before about this having this sort of the alternative is going for the Euros, Euro 32 instead, which would be a sort of consolation prize, I guess. But yeah, we may see some outcome before the end of the year on that. Be interesting to see, and that £11 million can go towards the making up for the reduction in income tax from Prosecco.
Well, there you go. But just on this feasibility study, I mean, what does we've heard this word bandied about with FIFA. What is a feasibility study? I mean, because are they going to, can we win the vote, or is it an economic assessment? What is a feasibility study from an FA point of view here?
Surely the feasibility study for actual venues in the UK and Ireland can take a few minutes and maybe just assess if any upgrades are needed at some. Largely, that has to be an assessment of votes around the world. And you probably don't need that much money to be able to do that. You just need to speak to the right people who know FIFA, or maybe just listen to this podcast. You might get a grasp of some of the power plays around the world of football. And you hear from Gianni Infantino when he's perhaps at a UEFA meeting, he'll present himself very much as one of UEFA still. All his other talk around the world is very much distancing himself from being European and seeing himself more as a non-European leader of world football and out in their interest.
I mean, people I've spoken to, senior people in the FIFA administration, absolutely, they see little point in going to a sort of Western European country, a developed nation. What they want is to go to China number one, and then perhaps India second, or somewhere else in the Far East. These sort of huge untapped, undeveloped markets as these new territories. However, I think they're going to be struggling to get there for 2030 for various reasons. I don't think China's going to be ready. Obviously, India is a long way off, and so especially with a big 48 team World Cup, I think it is going to be Europe. And again, this thing which we have mentioned before, perhaps with some sort of deal done with the South Americans to recognise their centenary.
One more pressing matters for FIFA this week, away from future World Cup bidding, has been an IFAB meeting discussing the latest on the laws of the game and new technology coming in down the line. First of all, one of the decisions, 5 subs becoming permanent in football.
Yeah, I mean, this is now so commonplace across the world football. Just about every top European league, apart from the English Premier League, uses it. To me, I just thought the writing was on the wall some time ago about this. I'm not surprised, and the big question is, because you don't have to have 5 substitutes, will the Premier League adopt it next season? I think there will be another big effort especially by the bigger clubs, to try and get this in. Will the smaller clubs reject it? Because at the last vote, I think it was 10 v 10, and you need 14 to get there.
The argument against it has always been that it's those teams with big pockets will be able to do well. But according to a statistician who is also a board member of Athletic Club de Bilbao, he's done some kind of analysis. He thinks it's not that simple, because some of those top teams have players that are so much better than everyone else that their reserves aren't as good as the players they replace. So, if you were to take off Mohamed Salah and bring on someone at Liverpool, you're diminishing the team by a huge amount compared to, I don't know, I'm not going to name a player here, a middling player at a middling club, and replace him with one slightly lower level. So that analysis needs to be fleshed out a bit before we say that the big clubs just do well out of this. It does seem like they would because of the resources, but maybe that isn't quite like that.
I think it became inevitable that 5 subs would become permanent once they were temporarily allowed, particularly because it was within the guise of helping player welfare and easing the burden. But I think we actually saw it at the Euros. Gareth Southgate's assistant Steve Holland at the start of the tournament was talking about how 5 subs will really be great for them. They can make lots of changes, but actually they didn't really in the end, and it probably shows the conservative nature of coaches. And quite a conservative decision at FIFA, no dramatic change. There was talk discussed in the IFAB meeting about whether to extend half time, something coming from South America.
Yeah, they wanted 25 minutes instead of 15 minutes at half time to indulge in a bit of NFL style entertainment. I think was the idea. Personally, I was delighted that the technical football panels of IFAB kicked that one fairly firmly into touch. Expressed a lot of reservations about it, because I think that their argument was, if you have 25 minutes, that can actually be a physical problem for some players. They sort of need to warm up again afterwards. It's too long. But I actually think from a spectator point of view, matches are already stretching much longer than they used to. And I just think 25 minutes at half time, it's like, please no.
I don't think 20 minutes would be much harm for the game. Help fans who have to go and queue for food and drinks, although maybe some tech will make that a bit easier. TV-wise, I suppose if it's a dull 0-0, then you've got less to talk about for the pundits, but they can fit more ad breaks in. But if they want to get a bit of entertainment in, maybe for an occasional game, to give it a bit of more of an event feel, I'm not so opposed. Maybe some of the written journalists in the stadium would have a bit more time to catch up on some of their writing as well.
Yeah, well, good. As long as they're all right. But it was only for those final games. I think that the idea of CONMEBOL was for the final of the Libertadores, their equivalent of the Champions League, the Copa America final, and maybe the Sudamericana final. They wanted, I think, a grand spectacle that befits an event of that dimension. I think those were the words that came from Alejandro Dominguez's office at the time. So you think, I don't know, Shakira or someone performing a halftime spectacular in those games. But football's already gone that way, hasn't it? In many ways, if you attend most finals now, you may not have
Shakira's there.
Shakira is there.
Although the Champions League final have cut out the pre-match music in the last couple of years, maybe that's in part because of COVID. And there's a whole big thing about, they're making it to America, and Black Eyed Peas, I remember, were there in Cardiff in 2017. But I don't see how it manages to damage football in some way.
I'll tell you how it does. I'll tell you how it does for an old fogey and someone who likes sitting in a crowd, etc. Is for the experience of being that you got crowd from one team on one side and the other, and these big moments just before kickoff, those 5 minutes when no one knows what the result's going to be, can be really exciting because everyone is like kind of singing full-throatedly, but then you can kind of see hands moving and mouths moving, but overlay that and they're drowned out by AC/DC or whoever coming out of the speakers. I miss some of those sort of natural crowd sounds, or maybe some of the governing bodies don't want to hear them, their executive councils and presidents being booed. That might be one of the other reasons. Who knows? But I do miss some of the old football sound at these games.
You've got your rattle out there while drinking on some Bovril, wagon wheel in the other hand as well.
Absolutely. You've sat next to me at too many games, Rob.
Well, on the other hand, you don't have like 5-a-side football matches in the middle of a sort of the top bill at Glastonbury, do you? I mean, it's just it's. I'm with you. Get me that cup of Bovril now, Tariq.
You mentioned Glastonbury. They do actually show live football on the big screens there from time to time during tournaments, like in 2019. England's quarter-final win at the Women's World Cup was seen for all the festival goers. And, we talk about delays to games. It's not just live entertainment that, of course, causes it. You get it with things like offsides, and particularly with VAR taking all that time. We might be a step closer now to automated offside, with Hawkeye making progress in that new bit of technology.
Yeah, so they've told FIFA the system's ready to go, and FIFA will now have to test it to make sure it passes their tests. But effectively, it's going to be this artificial intelligence, 28 points of the body being measured, and something like 12 cameras, and it will instantaneously decide whether somebody is offside when the ball is kicked. Send a message to the VAR, who will then look to see if the player is interfering with play or not, and then he can either rule out the goal or not.
It all works well in theory, as long as Hawkeye perhaps don't do like they did at the Benfica Stadium during the Champions League finals in August 2020, when one of the Hawkeye cameras was plugged in right in the same plug that I had to plug a laptop into as well. So there was the risk that a camera could be knocked out just from me trying to check.
There's only going to be one winner there, Rob Harris's laptop.
But it just seemed that good progress is being made. It seems like a football pitch can perfectly be mapped, and eventually the technology catches up with it. Maybe it's one for Mark Zuckerberg and Meta to get involved with.
Yeah.
Of course, there will be one effect of this, is that people are quite anti the very, very tight offside calls. I am certainly, and that has changed this season in the Premier League following the Euros, and so actually there's a bit more leeway given to the attackers. Potentially, this could get rid of that leeway again, so we could be back into the situation where your big toe is offside, and this time we can't argue about it because it's all the computer says no.
Maybe we get the daylight debate lads going again, because then I'm sure if you've got the right technology, it can notice daylight, and then it will go to maybe the advantage to the attacker.
Maybe Hawkeye can get it ready for the Club World Cup taking place in the UAE early next year. Chelsea amongst the teams going out there. And already in the UAE at the moment is another World Cup. It's the 2020 World Cup now in the first week of the Super 12 phase. And it's not been without some emotive moments. We've had Afghanistan playing, and before the matches, we've had the old anthem, the old flag, pre-Taliban takeover in August. And quite a bit of controversy in the South African ranks when we heard from Quinton de Kock at the start of the week that he wouldn't be following team orders to take a knee, and eventually he relented and will now take a knee and will stay at the tournament, only after he skipped the victory over the West Indies.
Yeah, I mean, so the South African Cricket Board issued a directive that all the players should take the knee. I mean, personally, I was actually speaking to Paul Elliott, the former Chelsea Celtic player, about this, and he is saying it's such a powerful message taking the knee, but he thinks it has to be of your own volition. I mean, in football, you've got the Premier League getting around to billions of people, and so it is very powerful. But I think if you try and oblige people to do it, then you're losing the point in a way. And so I do feel a bit that, I mean, if I've no idea why Quinton de Kock wouldn't take the knee. I have no idea why anybody wouldn't do so. But I think it's a bit like, as Voltaire said, you have to fight for his right not to do so if he doesn't want to do it. And he's apologised, and he said, he's prepared to do so if that helps educate others and make others' lives better. So I thought actually that was a really good move by him. So I think it's worked out well. I just wish all the South African players had done it of their own volition from the start.
His statement was really interesting, I thought. But the first thing that kind of needs to be made clear is what a mess the South African Cricket Board have made over this policy of theirs. They have been sort of fumbling around with it to the point where the players were on the way to the game, not knowing until the last minute what they were going to, whether it was going to be an edict or not. And then they were given this edict just, as they're arriving or just on the way to the stadium. I mean, how could they not get this right? I know, South Africa and its issues, with race, so well documented, and very important part of what that country is, and everyone quite rightly is very sensitive to race and racial issues there. So, given that, what is Cricket South Africa up to in making such a blunder here? And I thought his Quinton de Kock statement was really interesting as well. And he you got to remember, these people are human beings as well. They have their own histories where they come from, and he was talking about how he comes from a mixed family. His stepmother is black. His two half sisters, I believe, are mixed. And he, as he said, something quite interesting. He said, for me, Black lives have mattered since I was born, not just because there was an international movement. He said the rights and equality of all people is more important than any individual. I was raised to understand that we all have rights and they're important. I felt like, to your point, Martyn, my rights were taken away when I was told what we had to do in the way that we were told. I think it would have been better for everyone concerned if we had sorted this out before the tournament started. And we could have focused on our job to win cricket matches for our country. And he goes on, and it's always cricket South Africa. He said, there always seems to be drama when we go to World Cups. This isn't fair. And it reminded me of that France team that went to the Football World Cup, in South Africa in 2010, with all this off-field mayhem. And it does impact performance. These are, sports teams. These World Cups don't come around every year, and they're important moments. Just what a mess. This should have been handled a lot better by the federation.
And it was interesting hearing this week from the West Indies captain, Kieran Pollard, whose team does take a knee, and he wants to be sure that other players are performing it for the right reasons and not just because they're being ordered to.
It's something that we feel strongly about, as a team and as a people, as well, and we will continue to do it. So each and everyone has their own opinions on it, but as I've always said, once you're educated and you understand, we will understand you doing it. But I think education sort of is the key, and we don't want anyone doing it for us in solitude or feel sorry, for us.
I mean, it will be interesting going forward in the months and years ahead, just what does happen to players taking knee. Will this continue forevermore? Will there become a point where actually they decide not to, whether in cricket or in football? Because, one thing's for certain, sadly, we are still going to be grappling with racism in society and in sport in the years ahead still. You can see why players will continue to want to take a knee when they can't have faith necessarily in the sporting authorities to take action to clamp down on racism. And we saw it in English county cricket this week at Yorkshire, where they'd conducted an investigation, though we've still not seen the full findings of it, that found that the former captain, Azeem Rafiq, was the victim of racial harassment and bullying. And we discovered this week, in this long-running issue, that Yorkshire decided to take no disciplinary action at all against any of its employees. And Rafiq himself saying he was absolutely aghast by it. He responded by saying, just when you think this club couldn't get more embarrassing, you find a way, and seeing it's inconceivable that no one's gone, and he actually wants the whole board to resign at Yorkshire.
Yeah, it's been an absolute shambles, that whole, from the investigation, the sort of delay in giving any of the findings to anybody, including the man himself. The ECB have only just got it this week, so it's this is months after it's actually been done. So yeah, no, it's been really, really badly handled.
Well, staying in cricket, but moving to the money side of things, and the riches keep on growing in the Indian Premier League. We've had the auction this week for 2 new teams, and they've managed to generate $1.6 billion to sell the ownership of these sides. We've got a new franchise in Lucknow that will be owned by the RPSG Group. That's an Indian multinational conglomerate founded by Sanjeev Goenka. And that generated a sale of more than $900 million alone for that one. Almost $700 million was the cost of the new franchise in Ahmedabad, and that will be owned by CVC Capital Partners, well known for their previous ownership of Formula One. They've also now got stakes in rugby, and of course, they're trying to get hold of a 10% of Spain's La Liga commercial rights. There are, of course, losers in any auction, and one of them was Avram Glazer, the Manchester United co-owner, was in the running for a franchise, but was outbid.
Yeah, I understand that the final price was more than double what Avram Glazer was prepared to pay. Interesting that he was even considering it, but clearly was nowhere near prepared to put that enough money in.
Well, for those early investors, it's been hugely popular. These franchises have grown many-fold since the league launched. It's hugely successful, extremely popular. And I noticed the viewing figures on Sky are quite good for it in the UK as well. For those, nice to see a new team in Lucknow. Some of the best food in India, as far as I'm concerned. So, Rob, you love a meal. So
I look forward to going.
if you get a chance to check out the biryani in Lucknow, they've got some nice regional speciality kebabs as well. So head over there.
We might need to upgrade from our normal Dishoom meetup to actually fly out there for a meal.
But there was a little bit of controversy with the CVC purchase of Ahmedabad because CVC has got investments in gambling companies, and that was noted by figures in India, including the former IPL chairman Lalit Modi, who was booted out a few years ago now. He pointed this out, and gambling is huge but illegal in India, and the sport has been blighted by match fixing controversies on the subcontinent. So there have been concerns raised. The BCCI, the Indian Cricket Board, which is handing out these franchise, released a statement saying, "Yep, we don't care. They seem fit and proper owners. We've got legally binding assurances." No, they just said they've looked through everything, and everything is great. So yeah, 2 more teams, very successful league. Look forward to seeing it grow from strength to strength.
10 teams taking part in 2 groups of 5 in the IPL in 2022. Maybe there could be a future bid from the United States when the next Indian Premier League franchises come up for grabs. And might not be Avram Glazer who could be affording one, but maybe well on his way with the finances he's gained in the last couple of years is Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, because we've discovered via the New York Times this week that in an NFL owners meeting, they were informed that Roger Goodell earned nearly $128 million in just 2 years.
That's incredible. I mean, we thought Richard Scudamore during the time in the Premier League, when he was getting I think occasionally got about a £6 million bonus, but when he'd done a TV deal, well, that is quite amazing.
Those figures for Goodell, they're kind of linked almost mainly to bonuses connected to the TV deal. They've struck some huge television contracts because they've got. It's one of those markets which is rare these days, where there is genuine competition among major players for domestic rights, and they've sort of have been going up astronomically, and he gets a chunk of it. And I guess it's a closed league. It's a bunch of owners of the teams that decide what he gets, and they've come up with that formula. He's been there. Roger Goodell's been there for almost his entire working life. He was there in his early 20s. He's now in his mid 60s, and they say part of the reason to pay him so much and to keep him is all that institutional memory. He has known, the founders of some of the more modern teams, the children of the founders of some of the older teams, and the sons of the current. He's like a kind of a nexus for the entire business of that sport, and they probably think, 120 odd million, whatever, is fair compensation for him. But it's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, the last time we had any indication of his pay was in 2015 when he earned almost $32 million. The latest 5-year contract he signed to remain commissioner was in 2017. But one of the most important contracts that he managed to secure was last year, which was a new collective bargaining agreement between the NFL and the players, which ensures stability right the way through to 2030. So that's obviously the key to the success of the league, actually ensuring the players are taking part and happy. And of course, those TV contracts as well, worth around $100 billion all the way through to 2033. So they know financially things are stable.
Say that again, Rob. $100 billion. That is a big check.
And they managed to get them with a variety of broadcasters. It's not like exclusivity. So you've got ESPN with ABC, Fox, CBS, NBC, Amazon, and they've got their own NFL network too. So, they know for more than the next decade, things are okay. However, viewing habits change at all in the world of NFL.
But if you're a player, this is just on this. If I'm a player, I'll be wondering, why? Imagine you're like the David Beckham of the NFL or whatever. I don't know who the best player is, but if
Tom
Roger
Brady
Goodell earns more money than me, I'd be a little bit miffed. But anyway, let's move on.
Well, as we wrap things up, awaiting our £100 million plus paycheck, let's rattle through some of the other sports topics going round this week behind the headlines.
Yeah, a couple of interesting things. I mean, in rugby union, I think we talked before about this World 12s idea, 12-a-side game, which Ian Ritchie, the former Rugby Football Union chairman, has been championing. A massive blow for them is that World Rugby have said that it won't sanction the format. They're still trying to push ahead with it, but if you haven't got the world governing body giving their permission, I think it's going to really struggle. So that's a big blow for them.
Is it anti-competitive, that? The fact that they're dictating exactly what form the game should take, how many players have to take place, not allowing new formats to spring up. The fact we've already discussed the IPL and the 2020 World Cup just shows what a sort of success and progress that format has made over recent years.
Yes, but I think cricket is you can't really compare it to rugby union. You've got the sevens, you've got the 15-a-side game, and if you try and have something slightly close to 15 or in between, I don't really think it works. I think it's it will damage one of the other formats for sure.
The world of Formula One, we're building up towards the end of the season, which also means a trip out to Saudi Arabia. And wait to see if there's any Newcastle shirts all over that race. But you've got some news on that as well.
Yeah, well, at least you'll be able to wear a Newcastle shirt in Jeddah, the first time the Grand Prix will have been held in Saudi Arabia, because last week the Saudi Arabian authorities sent out a directive to the teams, basically saying, what is and is not allowed in terms of dress. So sort of no, women aren't allowed to wear short skirts or blouses with short sleeves. They've now done a complete U-turn on that. A new email sent out to all the teams this week saying the Ministry of Sport has stressed there will be no dress code, not only at the circuit, but even in public places in Jeddah, and this applies to everyone regardless of gender. I think that's quite a remarkable change, actually.
It is huge. Shows how fast the change is happening in Saudi Arabia and how hard it is for them to kind of manage it. I wonder if the press release was issued by the same person who wrote the reverse ferret for Newcastle fans last week on dress code. Please don't wear Saudi dress on 24 hours later. Please do wear Saudi dress. I mean, it just shows how fast all this stuff is changing. And you can't keep a good investment fund down. The public investment fund of Saudi Arabia, hot on the heels of buying Newcastle, has teamed up with Greg Norman, the golfer, this week to announce a 10-tournament series with at least $200 million in prize money to sort of fund this breakaway golf league that they want to launch. There has been talk about this before, and some of the players have said they would rather stick with the current European Tour PGA structure. But I guess money, often as it does, money might tell in this case.
It could prove just too irresistible. And even this week, there is renewed speculation about whether Saudi Arabia will relax its complete ban on alcohol being sold in the kingdom. It might be another sign that they're trying to open up to attract sport, tourism and investment by finally allowing foreigners, at least, to be able to drink there, as is the case in Qatar, where you can get alcohol in bars.
So Dwayne The Rock might not have been wrong when he tweeted MBS a couple of years ago when he told him he was looking forward to having shots with him in next time he was in Riyadh. So yeah, I mean, again, the pace of change is remarkable. Guys, another really kind of embarrassing situation for a sporting superpower potentially is next week. China, Beijing, is going to host the Winter Olympics in February. And its ice hockey team is so bad that the International Ice Hockey Federation is having a meeting next week. And it might, for the first time since host countries were awarded automatic places in the men's ice hockey competition, boot the men's team out for not being very good. And it's a very careful balancing act here for China. Do you want to be humiliated almost now and be kicked out, or face the US and Canada, who they've been drawn against in their pool with those NHL stars? So that's something to look out for. You could spend all your billions on buying sports events and building infrastructure, but maybe you can't buy a national sports team.
Well, unless you change some rules somehow. Something to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. But that's all for now for Sport Unlocked. For myself, Rob Harris, from Tariq Panja, from Martyn Ziegler. If you've got any feedback, thoughts, comments, want to watch any extra content from the pod, we're at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And you can also message us on there. But for now, whatever sport you're viewing in the days ahead, hope it's enjoyable. Goodbye for now.